This story is titled, I Dedicated My Life to Our Family Business. But when my father retired, he handed everything to my unqualified sister instead. Hi everyone! Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. I'm 29 male, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been tied to our family business. My dad, Hank, started the furniture company back in the 80s when he was barely scraping by. He always said it was his ticket out of poverty. What started as a tiny workshop in a rented garage grew into a full-scale operation, with a showroom, loyal clients, and a reputation for crafting some of the best custom furniture in the state. We didn't make cheap stuff you'd find at a big box store. No, we built pieces that people bragged about owning. Conference tables for high-end offices, hand-carved dining sets for wealthy families, and custom desks for executives who didn't blink at spending 5 figures on a workspace. Dad always called it functional art. Growing up, it was understood that I'd take over one day. Not in a golden spoon in your mouth kind of way, but more like, you're the oldest son, so this is your duty. I didn't mind. I loved the work. When I was 10, Dad started taking me to the workshop on weekends. At first, I was just sweeping floors and stacking scrap wood, but I soaked up everything. I watched how he worked with his hands, how he treated every piece of wood like it had its own personality. By the time I was a teenager, I was sanding and staining chairs, learning about tools, and tagging along to client meetings. Jake, Dad would say, this business isn't just about making furniture, it's about making relationships. People don't just buy our work, they buy us. That stuck with me. Meanwhile, my younger sister Chloe couldn't have cared less. She's 4 years younger than me and always acted like she was too good for anything that didn't involve social media or shopping. While I was in the workshop, Chloe was usually off with her friends, spending Dad's money on designer clothes or whatever the latest trend was. Chloe always had this air of entitlement. Even as a kid, she never heard no. If she wanted something, she got it. I remember one Christmas when she threw a tantrum because her tablet wasn't the exact color she wanted. She cried until Dad went out the next day and bought her the one she'd asked for. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, the kid who didn't complain and got straight to work. By the time I graduated high school, I was practically Dad's right-hand man. College wasn't even a discussion. I went straight into the business. Why wouldn't I? I'd been preparing for it my whole life. I worked every department, warehouse, sales, admin, even delivery, so I'd know the company inside and out. Chloe, on the other hand, spent her college years finding herself. She switched majors 3 times before finally settling on marketing. Not that she ever planned to actually use her degree. After graduation, she floated between random projects, calling them passion ventures, that she dropped as soon as they got hard. Still, she loved showing off the family business. She'd tell her friends, my family owns this amazing company, but she never lifted a finger to help. She'd come into the showroom occasionally to get content for her Instagram, posting selfies with our work like she had anything to do with making it. It was frustrating, but I let it go. I figured she wasn't a threat. She'd never shown any real interest in the business. By the time I turned 27, I was running the day-to-day operation. Dad had started stepping back a little, letting me take the reins. He still handled the big picture stuff, but I was the one keeping the gears turning. I worked long hours, sacrificed weekends, and skipped vacations because I believed in what we were building. Dad always said, when the time comes, Jake, this business will be yours. You're the one who understands it, who cares about it. Those words kept me going, even when the work got exhausting. Then, last spring, Dad announced he was officially retiring. He called a meeting at the office to share some exciting news. I walked in that day thinking it was going to be a big moment for me, the moment I'd been working toward my entire life. Instead, I walked into a nightmare. When I got to Dad's office, Chloe was sitting in his chair, leaning back with her feet up on the desk. She had this smug grin plastered on her face, like she'd just pulled off the biggest prank of the century. Dad was standing next to her, looking calm. Too calm. Jake, he said, I've made a decision. Chloe is going to take over as CEO. At first, I thought I misheard him. What? I asked, genuinely confused. Chloe's taking the lead, he repeated, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. Good one, Dad. What's the real announcement? But he wasn't joking. He looked me dead in the eye and said, I think it's time for the company to evolve, and Chloe has the vision to take it to the next level. I stared at him, stunned. Chloe? The same Chloe who didn't even know the difference between oak and pine? The same Chloe who once asked me if plywood was a type of tree? Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with fake confidence. Relax, Jake. You'll still have your role here. I'm just bringing some fresh ideas to the table. I could feel my blood boiling. Fresh ideas? I shot back. You've never even worked here, Chloe. You have no idea how this company runs. She shrugged, like it didn't matter. That's why I'll have you to guide me, she said, flashing a fake smile. I turned to Dad, desperate for him to see reason. Dad, I've spent my entire life building this company with you. Chloe hasn't done anything. How is this fair? But he just sighed, like he was already tired of the argument. Jake, you're great at what you do, but Chloe's got connections. She understands how to modernize the business. This is what's best for the future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done, everything I'd given up, Dad was handing over the business to Chloe on a silver platter. I felt like a stranger in my own family. Chloe just sat there, smirking, like she'd already won. And maybe she had. That was the moment I realized everything I thought I knew about my place in the family, about my future, was a lie. I walked out of that office in a daze. I couldn't process it. Chloe was running the company? The same sister who once bailed on her part-time summer job because she didn't like the uniforms? I didn't know whether to scream, laugh, or just quit on the spot. But I didn't quit. Not yet. I told myself I'd stick around, at least for a little while. Maybe Dad would come to his senses. Maybe Chloe would realize she was in over her head and step down. I didn't want to abandon the company. I'd poured too much into it. The employees trusted me. The clients trusted me. And deep down, I didn't trust Chloe to keep it together. But man, she didn't make it easy. The first week of her leadership was like watching a bad sitcom. She showed up to work on Monday at noon in a flashy outfit, sipping some overpriced drink and acting like she owned the place. I was already in my office when she barged in, dropped her designer purse on my desk and said, "Okay, Jake, let's talk strategy." Strategy? I asked, looking up from the paperwork I'd been buried in all morning. Yeah, like, what's our vibe? I feel like we need to rebrand, you know? Make things fresher, more modern. I blinked. Chloe, we don't need a rebrand. The brand works. It's why clients come to us. They know we deliver quality. She waved me off like I was boring her. Yeah, quality's great, but people want more these days. Like, what's our social media game? Are we doing collabs? Influencers? We need to go viral. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Chloe, this isn't a clothing brand. We make custom furniture. No one's buying a $10,000 conference table because they saw it on TikTok. Her eyes lit up like I'd just given her the best idea ever. Oh my God, Jake, yes! TikTok. That's what we need to do. Viral videos of us making furniture. I didn't even know how to respond. She was treating this company like it was some kind of hobby project, not a decades-old business with real clients and real responsibilities. Things only got worse from there. Chloe started making changes without consulting anyone. She canceled long-standing contracts with suppliers because she didn't like their vibes and tried to switch to cheaper materials to cut costs. I told her it was a bad idea, that our clients would notice the difference in quality, but she didn't listen. It's about margins, Jake, she said, like she'd suddenly become a business guru. She also started throwing money around like it was Monopoly cash. She hired some trendy marketing firm to revamp our image, paying them an absurd amount for a new logo and some sleek but pointless website updates. Meanwhile, our existing clients were getting frustrated because their orders were delayed, and Chloe was too busy brainstorming brand aesthetics to care. The employees were starting to lose patience too. Most of them had been with us for years, and they were used to a certain way of doing things. Chloe, of course, didn't bother to learn how anything worked before she started making changes. She'd show up late to meetings, throw out half-baked ideas, and then disappear for the rest of the day. One time, she scheduled an all-hands brainstorming session on a Friday afternoon. Everyone had to stop what they were doing and gather in the conference room, where Chloe spent an hour rambling about future-forward synergy and disrupting the industry. Nobody knew what the hell she was talking about. After the meeting, one of the senior craftsmen, Dan, pulled me aside. Dan's been with the company since the beginning. He's practically family. He shook his head and said, "Jake, I don't know how much more of this I can take. She's turning this place into a circus." I didn't blame him. I felt the same way. The final straw came about 2 months into Chloe's reign. We had a massive order for a luxury hotel chain, custom dining tables, chairs, and a centerpiece bar for one of their flagship locations. It was one of the biggest contracts we'd ever landed, and it was supposed to be my project. But Chloe, being Chloe, decided she wanted to take the lead. She completely ignored the timeline I'd put together and started making changes to the designs without consulting the client. When I confronted her about it, she rolled her eyes and said, "Jake, stop micromanaging. I know what I'm doing." But of course, she really didn't. The project fell apart. The client was furious, and we ended up losing not just the contract, but the relationship entirely. It cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention the hit to our reputation. When I tried to talk to Chloe about it, she acted like it wasn't a big deal. It's just one client, she said. We'll bounce back. I couldn't believe how casual she was about it. This wasn't just one client. This was a huge deal for the company, and she'd completely screwed it up. That night, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home. I stared at the stack of papers on my desk, the invoices, the client emails, the production schedules, and felt this overwhelming sense of defeat. This wasn't the business I grew up loving. It wasn't the legacy Dad had built. It was a mess. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't clean it up. The next morning, I went to Dad's house. He was sitting on the porch, reading the paper like he always did. I sat down across from him and said, "Dad, we need to talk." He looked up, and I could tell he already knew what I was going to say. "I can't do this anymore," I told him. "Chloe's ruining the company. She doesn't know what she's doing, and she won't listen to me. You have to step in." Dad sighed and set the paper down. "Jake, I know it's been rough, but you've got to give her time. She's still learning." "Learning?" I snapped. "Dad, she's destroying everything you built. She's driving away clients. She's alienating the employees, and she's making terrible decisions. This isn't just rough, it's a disaster." He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he said, "Jake, I made my decision. Chloe's the CEO now. You need to support her." I stared at him, stunned. He was really going to let this happen. He was going to let her run the company into the ground. "Fine," I said, standing up. "But I'm done. If you want Chloe to run the company, she can do it without me." After walking away from the company, I felt empty. You'd think I'd feel relieved after all the crap I'd put up with, but honestly, it was the opposite. The business wasn't just a job to me, it was my whole life. I'd spent over a decade building it, making sure Dad's dream didn't just survive but thrived. Now, all of it felt like it was for nothing. The first couple of weeks were weird. I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd spent years waking up at 5 a.m., heading to the office, and not leaving until it was dark. Suddenly, I had all this time, and I hated it. I'd sit in my apartment, scrolling through job postings that didn't feel right. I couldn't imagine working for someone else, but starting over? That felt impossible too. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about what was happening at the company. Old coworkers would text me, venting about how chaotic things had gotten. Chloe was doubling down on her modernization plans, ignoring deadlines, and alienating clients. One guy told me she'd fired 2 senior craftsmen because their vibe didn't fit the brand. Those men had been with the company for years, and now they were out of work because Chloe didn't like how they dressed. Clients were pulling out left and right. Orders were delayed. Quality was slipping, and the showroom was practically a ghost town. The worst part? Chloe didn't seem to care. She was too busy hosting vision meetings and posting selfies from the office, talking about how she was transforming the industry. One day, a former client reached out to me directly. It was the owner of a boutique hotel we'd worked with for years. He asked if I could take on a private project, something outside the company. He'd ordered custom furniture from us before, but with the current chaos, he didn't trust Chloe to handle it. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to step on any toes, and legally, I wasn't sure what I could do. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't owe Chloe or the company anything. I wasn't under contract, and I wasn't stealing clients. They were coming to me because Chloe had driven them away. So, I agreed. It wasn't a huge project, just a few custom tables and chairs for one of his new locations, but it felt good to be back in the workshop. I rented space in a friend's garage, bought some supplies, and got to work. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. When I delivered the finished pieces, the client was thrilled. He told me they were even better than what he'd gotten from the company before. That meant everything to me. It reminded me that I didn't need the family business to prove my worth. While I was finding my footing, things at the company were going from bad to worse. Chloe's big ideas were backfiring left and right. She'd sunk a ridiculous amount of money into a rebranding campaign that made no sense. The new logo looked like it belonged on a juice bar, not a high-end furniture company. Employees were leaving in droves. By this point, most of the senior staff had either quit or been fired. Chloe replaced them with her friends, people who had zero experience, but knew how to agree with her every whim. The craftsmanship suffered, the quality control went out the window, and the company's reputation took a massive hit. Even Dad couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, I got a call from Mom. She sounded exhausted, like she'd been crying. "Jake, your dad's not doing well," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "He's been feeling off for weeks. He finally went to the doctor, and they found something. He has lymphoma." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the chest. Dad was the strongest person I knew, the guy who'd built an empire with his bare hands. I couldn't imagine him being sick, let alone with cancer. It's early, she added quickly. The doctors are optimistic, but he needs to start chemo right away. I told her I'd be there the next day. When I saw Dad, he looked smaller. He was sitting in his recliner, a blanket draped over his legs, flipping through the TV channels like everything was fine. But I could see it in his face. He was scared. "Hey, kid," he said when I walked in. "Hey, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I wanted to ask a million questions. What stage was it? What were the odds? How long would treatment take? But I didn't. Instead, I just sat with him. And for the first time in a long time, we talked about normal stuff. Mom was the one who brought up the company. "Jake, it's a disaster," she said, her voice shaky. "Clients are leaving. The employees are miserable. And Chloe, she doesn't even come to the office half the time." I clenched my jaw. Of course, Chloe was nowhere to be found. Dad sighed. "She's trying," he muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. "She's not trying, Hank," Mom shot back. "She's failing, and you know it." I didn't say anything. What was the point? I'd been warning him about this for months, and he hadn't listened. Over the next few weeks, I split my time between helping Dad and working on small projects for clients who'd reached out to me. It was exhausting, but in a way, it felt good to stay busy. Chloe, on the other hand, completely disappeared. She didn't show up to the hospital, didn't call to check on Dad, didn't even send a text. When Mom tried to reach her, Chloe said she was too overwhelmed and needed space. Space? From what? She wasn't the one fighting cancer, and she sure as hell wasn't running the company. By the time Dad started his second round of chemo, the company was hanging by a thread. Employees were quitting faster than they could be replaced, and clients were openly trashing us online. I heard rumors that suppliers were refusing to work with us because Chloe hadn't paid them on time. Then, out of nowhere, Chloe packed up and moved to California. She left a vague email for the staff, something about seeking new opportunities, and that was it. She was gone. Mom called me the day Chloe's email went out. She was furious. "Jake, she abandoned us," she said. "She abandoned your father when he needs her most. I don't even know what to do anymore." I didn't know what to say. Chloe had always been selfish, but this was a new low. She'd walked away from the mess she'd made without a second thought, leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. By now, the company was in free fall. Clients were threatening lawsuits, employees were demanding unpaid wages, and Dad was too sick to step in. I knew I had to make a decision. Either let the company crumble or step in and try to save it. Part of me wanted to let it burn. After everything that had happened, after how Dad had dismissed me and Chloe had disrespected me, why should I care? But another part of me couldn't do it. This company wasn't just Dad's legacy, it was mine too. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. When I decided to step back into the company, I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. What Chloe left behind wasn't just a mess. It was a full-on dumpster fire. The employees were demoralized, the clients were pissed, and the company was hemorrhaging money. I wasn't even sure if it could be saved, but I couldn't just stand by and let Dad's life's work go up in flames. Walking back into the office felt strange. It had been months since I'd quit, and everything looked wrong. Chloe's ridiculous rebranding campaign was everywhere. Gaudy posters with meaningless slogans like "Elevate your space" plastered across the walls. The showroom was practically empty, and the few employees who were left looked like they were just going through the motions. I walked into the workshop, and my heart sank. The space, which used to be a hub of activity, was dead quiet. Only 2 craftsmen were left, Dan and another guy named Miguel. They were working on a half-finished dining table, their expressions grim. "Jake," Dan said when he saw me, "what are you doing here?" "I'm back," I said, trying to sound confident even though I wasn't sure what that meant yet. Dan raised an eyebrow. "You here to clean up Chloe's mess?" "Something like that," I muttered. He nodded, his face unreadable, then went back to work. The first thing I did was dig through the company's finances. It was worse than I thought. Chloe had blown through almost all of our reserves on her ridiculous modernization projects, flashy ad campaigns, unnecessary office renovations, and that overpriced marketing firm. Meanwhile, invoices from suppliers were piling up, and we had a stack of client refunds that hadn't been processed yet. The second thing I did was meet with the remaining employees. There weren't many left. Most of the senior staff had either quit or been fired, and the ones who stayed looked like they were ready to jump ship at any moment. I called a meeting in the conference room, and it was painfully awkward. The room was too big for the small group, and the tension was thick. "All right," I said, standing at the front of the room. "I know things have been rough lately. Chloe's decisions, well, let's just say they weren't great. But I'm here now, and we're going to fix this." One of the sales reps, Karen, raised her hand. "How? Half our clients have left, and the ones who haven't are threatening to sue us. Do you have a plan?" I didn't blame her for being skeptical. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "But the first step is stabilizing what we have left. We're going to focus on fulfilling the orders that are still in the pipeline, and we're going back to basics: quality, reliability, and transparency. No more gimmicks, no more rebranding nonsense. They didn't look convinced, but I couldn't blame them. Actions speak louder than words, and I had a lot of work to do. The next few weeks were brutal. I worked nonstop, trying to put out fires while rebuilding relationships with clients and suppliers. I spent hours on the phone, apologizing to people who'd been burned by Chloe's incompetence and begging them to give us another chance. Some agreed, reluctantly, but others told me to get lost. One client, a small design firm we'd worked with for years, said, "Jake, I trust you, but I don't trust the company anymore. How do I know this won't happen again?" I didn't have a good answer. All I could do was promise to personally oversee their projects and hope they'd take me at my word. At the same time, I had to deal with the employees. Morale was at an all-time low, and I couldn't blame them. Chloe had treated them like pawns in her ridiculous schemes, and they were understandably bitter. I made it a point to talk to each of them individually, to hear their concerns and let them know I was there to support them. It wasn't easy. Some were hesitant to trust me after everything that had happened, and a few even told me they were planning to leave as soon as they found other jobs. But others, like Dan and Miguel, were willing to stick it out. For now, at least. Then there was Dad. He was still recovering from chemo, so he wasn't around much, but I kept him updated on what was going on. Every time I told him about another disaster I had to clean up, he'd sigh and mutter, "I should have listened to you, Jake." Part of me wanted to throw it in his face. Yeah, you should have. But what good would that do? He was already beating himself up enough. Instead, I focused on moving forward. One evening, I stopped by their house after work to drop off some groceries for Mom. She'd been too busy taking care of Dad to keep up with errands, so I figured it was the least I could do. When I walked in, Dad was sitting in his recliner, staring at the muted TV. He looked up when he saw me and gave a weak smile. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice a little raspy. "Hey, Dad," I replied, setting the bags on the counter. "You staying for dinner?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to avoid sitting through another awkward meal where we danced around the elephant in the room. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know how many more dinners we'd have. "Yeah, I'll stay," I said, grabbing a chair and pulling it up next to him. We sat in silence for a while, watching some nature documentary about lions. I could tell he wanted to say something, but he kept clenching and unclenching his hands like he was trying to work up the courage. Finally, he spoke. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, not sure where this was going. "Do you hate me?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't expecting that. I sat back, letting the words hang in the air for a moment before answering. "No, I don't hate you," I said honestly. "But I won't lie. It hurt, Dad. When you gave the company to Chloe, it felt like you didn't see me. Like all the work I'd done didn't matter." He nodded slowly, his eyes glued to the TV. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said after a long pause. "I thought Chloe needed it more than you did. You were always so steady, so dependable. I guess I figured you'd be fine no matter what." That stung in a different way. "Dad, I was fine because I worked my ass off to be fine. That doesn't mean I didn't need your support. You built that company, and I gave everything to keep it going. Then you handed it over to someone who didn't care." He winced, like the words physically hurt him. "I know," he said softly. "I know I messed up. I let you down. I thought Chloe would rise to the occasion. I didn't want to believe she'd walk away like that." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "She's been walking away her whole life, Dad. You just didn't want to see it." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached over and patted my arm with a trembling hand. "You've done more than I ever could have asked for, Jake. I'm sorry it took me so long to tell you that." Over the next few weeks, Dad started to open up more. I think seeing the company almost collapse, and Chloe's complete lack of accountability, was a wake-up call for him. He'd always been so focused on what he thought people could be that he ignored who they actually were. One night, while we were sitting in the living room, he told me about his early days in the business. "You know, when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing," he said with a chuckle. "Your mom and I used to argue all the time about money. She wanted me to get a regular job, something steady, but I was too stubborn to give up." "Sounds familiar," I joked, and he laughed harder than I'd heard in months. "It wasn't until I had you that I started to figure it out," he continued, his tone turning more serious. "I wanted to build something you could be proud of, something that would give you a better life than I had. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it felt genuine, and that was enough for me, for now anyway. My relationship with Dad still felt like it was hanging by a thread. There were nights I'd lie awake, replaying the moment he chose Chloe over me, wondering how he could have been so blind. As the weeks turned into months, things slowly started to stabilize. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way. but we were making progress. I brought back some of the senior staff who'd left, convincing them that the company was worth saving. I reached out to old clients, offering discounts and guarantees to win back their trust. I even took on a few small projects myself, spending nights in the workshop to remind people what our company was really about. Chloe, of course, was still nowhere to be found. She was radio silent. She hadn't called, texted, or emailed since she left for California. As far as I was concerned, that was a blessing. The last thing I needed was her swooping back in to cause more chaos. Mom mentioned she'd tried to call her a few times, but Chloe never picked up. I wasn't surprised. She'd always been good at disappearing when things got tough. Then, one afternoon, Mom told me Chloe had sent an email. It wasn't an apology. Of course not. Instead, it was a rambling message about how she was exploring new opportunities and needed money to reinvest in herself. She said she's struggling to make ends meet. I couldn't stop myself from laughing when Mom told me. She wants money? I said, shaking my head. After everything she's done? Mom sighed. I told her no, we've got enough problems to deal with here, she said. I'm done enabling her. That was the first time I'd ever heard Mom put her foot down with Chloe, and honestly, it was a little shocking. I didn't say it out loud, but I was proud of her for finally standing up for herself. By the end of the year, the company was finally back on solid ground. We weren't thriving yet, but we were stable. I couldn't have done it without the employees who stuck by me, the clients who gave us another chance, and honestly, the lessons I'd learned from watching everything fall apart. Dad was still recovering, but he seemed stronger every day. And me? I was finally starting to feel like I was in control. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like things were heading in the right direction. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay. I'd spent so much of my life tied to the company that I couldn't tell where it ended, and I began. And after everything, Dad's betrayal, Chloe's mess, and the months of picking up the pieces, I realized I needed something that was just mine. One evening, after dinner at my parents' house, I told Dad my decision. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, a couple of mugs of coffee in hand. Dad, I said, breaking the comfortable silence, I've been thinking, I'm not going to stay at the company. He looked at me, his face unreadable. For a second, I thought he might argue, try to convince me to stay. Instead, he just nodded slowly. I figured, he said quietly. I'm not leaving because of you, I added quickly, or because of Chloe. It's just, I need something new. I need to build something on my own. He took a sip of his coffee, then set the mug down on the table beside him. Jake, I get it. I really do. You've done more for this company than I ever could have asked. And if anyone's earned the right to move on, it's you. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Thanks, Dad, I said, my voice a little shaky. You know, he continued, leaning back in his chair, when I was your age, I didn't have half the guts you do. Starting this company was the scariest thing I ever did, but it was also the best thing I ever did. If you've got something you want to build, Jake, go for it. Don't wait around like I did. I nodded, letting his words sink in. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were on the same page. The next day, I handed over my resignation. Again. This time, though, I wasn't leaving in anger or frustration. I'd done my part, and I was ready to move on. I worked with the new leadership team to make the transition as smooth as possible, ensuring the company would keep running without me. It felt strange, stepping away after everything I'd been through, but it also felt right. I decided to start my own small woodworking business. Not a big operation like the family company, but something personal, something that reflected my own vision. I rented a little workshop on the edge of town and started taking on custom projects. At first, it was just me and a few basic tools. I'd spend my days crafting tables, chairs, and other pieces for local clients, and at night, I'd work on building a website and spreading the word. It was slow going, but it felt good. Honest, almost. Every piece I made was a reminder that I didn't need the family business to define me. Word started to spread, and before I knew it, I was getting more orders than I could handle on my own. I hired a couple of local craftsmen, guys I trusted to uphold the same standards I'd learned from Dad. And slowly, my little business started to grow. Meanwhile, things with my family were better. Not perfect, but better. Dad was getting stronger every day, and while he still couldn't do the hands-on work he used to love, he found other ways to stay involved. He'd stop by my workshop every now and then, offering advice or just sitting in the corner watching me work. Mom seemed more relaxed too. Without Chloe constantly causing drama, she had more time to focus on herself. She even picked up a new hobby, gardening, which she said helped her stay sane. As for Chloe, she was still in California, doing whatever it was she did. She hadn't reached out since her half-hearted email asking for money, and honestly, I was fine with that. Mom mentioned once that she'd heard through the grapevine Chloe was trying to start a boutique clothing line, but I didn't bother asking for details. One day, about 6 months after I left the family company, I got a call from an old client. It was the owner of a high-end restaurant who'd been with us back when I was still working under Dad. He'd heard about my new business and wanted to order a custom bar and dining set for his latest project. "Jake," he said, "I'll be honest. I was hesitant to work with the family company after everything that happened, but I've always trusted you. If you're the one making it, I know it'll be perfect." Hearing that made all the late nights and early mornings worth it. A few weeks later, I delivered the finished pieces to the restaurant. As I stood there, looking at the sleek, handcrafted bar I'd built from scratch, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just another project. It was a symbol of everything I'd overcome. As I was leaving, the owner shook my hand and said, "You've got a gift, Jake? Don't let anyone take that away from you." Looking back, I can't believe how much has changed. A year ago, I felt like I was drowning, trapped in a situation where I'd lost control of everything I'd worked for. Now, I'm standing on my own 2 feet, building something that's mine. The family business is still around, and from what I hear, it's doing okay under the new management team. I don't keep tabs on it, though. I've moved on, and for the first time in a long time, I feel free. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes you have to let go of what you thought your life was supposed to be. I spent years chasing Dad's approval, trying to live up to this idea of legacy he'd built in his head. But in the end, the only approval that really matters is your own. I'm not angry anymore. At Dad, at Chloe, at any of it. It's all in the past. And while I can't say I'm thankful for the way things went down, I am thankful for where I've ended up. This new chapter isn't what I expected, but it's mine. And that's enough. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. If you've ever had to start over, or if you're thinking about it now, just know this. It's hard, but it's worth it. You're worth it.